Welcome back to Project 99 Base Plates. In this project, we are building a massive, fully custom, fantasy-themed Lego city. In the last episode, we started building the foundation of the city's grandest structure, the Royal Palace. However, we only built a small part of it. The whole structure needs to become much taller, and then we also need to mirror it.
Which is exactly what we'll be doing in this episode.
You're gonna want to stick around until the end of the video because this build eclipses anything we've done so far.
Thankfully, this time around, we've already got all our bricks in advance. Yeah, I think that's gonna keep us busy for a while. All right, let's take this to the Lego room, get it sorted, and get started.
We start the episode off by sorting and storing our new Lego bricks. There's a lot of filler bricks, which is awesome because we're gonna need those very soon. But just as I was ready to start building, my compositionally aware cat required attention. Excellent work. Well, then we can't really proceed without grading the other one as well. Yeah, okay, enough with the artist jokes. Let's get this build underway.
All right, we are ready to go. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, there's two things that need to happen. We need to extend this out and up, and then we also need to mirror the whole structure. Now, I'm gonna do it in that order because when we start adjusting and modifying this structure, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna realize there are going to have to be some changes and improvements that I make to the structure. And so doing that work first means that, once we get around to building this copy, we'll have all of those improvements ready to go. So it'll save us a bunch of time. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is this ring of flying buttresses that we have here. Normally, these flying buttresses, they serve a very specific purpose in cathedrals. Like, they are there to essentially take the weight of the roof and deflect that into the ground. I can show you what I mean by that. So if you imagine that this is a cathedral wall and you have a cathedral roof, this flying buttress here is going to basically absorb some of the downward force caused by the weight of the roof and redirect it into the ground. Now, in our case, because this ring sits against a wall with no roof on top of it, they don't really serve that purpose. And on top of that, this wall is also concave, which is already a much stronger structure than, let's say, a flat wall. So it's not an unreasonable question to ask, well, why is there a ring of flying buttresses? Well, the answer to that is also really simple. It's because it looks super cool. Once we've completed this ring and we've got this ring of diagonal surfaces that are the product of these flying buttresses, that's going to be visually very impactful. So I'm excited to get that done. Also, a little bit of trivia here. This ring of flying buttresses wasn't even inspired by those you find in cathedrals. They were actually inspired by a neo-Gothic skyscraper in Chicago that they built in the 1920s called the Tribune Tower. It too has a ring of these structures on its roof, and I'm pretty sure they don't really serve the purpose there either, other than to look amazing, which they most certainly do. All right, let's talk about building. As part of the building process, the first thing we need to do is take some measurements and compare this build to what we have in the 3D model. Because while I'm fairly convinced that, this radius is the right dimension, beyond that, in my mind, it's a lot fuzzier, and I'm not really sure how tall to build this and how far out we should go, so let's go do that right now.
Since my brain wants to think in centimeters and my tape measure is in inches, and I don't even want to think about what scale my blender scene is in, I'm going to be using a somewhat less conventional unit of measurement, the standard Lego base plate. Looking at the 3D model, the lower story of the harbor is meant to be about 4 studs shy of a full base plate in height, and we're pretty close. It's not perfect, but well within acceptable margins. Next up is the full diameter of the circular harbor. In the 3D model, it's just under 2.5 base plates wide. Now, if we want the individual segments of this wall to seamlessly connect, we're somewhat limited in terms of where we can actually build it. The dotted line here represents the most viable diameter, but it's a bit larger than what our 3D model prescribes. Part of the reason why there is this difference is because I failed to properly account for the space we need between the two circular segments. But we'll make it work somehow. Admittedly, I have to fight my OCD because the harbor is not an actual perfect circle now, but it's fine, let's move on. There's only one more thing we need to do before we proceed, and that is to install lighting inside the floor of the second story and to hide the wires. By using panels in the fence, we allow the lights to swivel backwards and will hopefully establish some very atmospheric uplighting. Alright, next up, let me talk you through some of the architectural details I have in mind for the second story of the harbor. Alright, I'll see if I can explain this a little bit, because at this point I believe I've got a prototype that I think is going in the direction that I want it to. So, as you can see here, the green bricks right here, those represent the line that the wall needs to be at. But the problem is if we build the wall here, it's going to be very flat and boring, and I don't like that. It would also get a little claustrophobic with these flying buttresses here. There's like very little space in between. So my solution for this is basically to carve out a section here, and I'm going to do that in two different ways. The spots where we have these flying buttresses, those will have this like faux column, and they come forward a little bit, and then you have this like window that the buttress goes into. You can see that a little better here. This prototype is a little bit further along. And then in between, I've got a bigger arch section that also has some amount of distance in it. I'm thinking of these as like storefronts. I put the helmet racks from Bear Doer in here as a mock-up for what an armor store would look like, where you can basically buy armor pieces or something like that. And I can do that in 2 or 3 more places along this edge. I'll have a food store, restaurant, something like that. The plan is to basically propagate this idea of this overhanging edge here along this entire curve, and I think that's gonna create a much more interesting boundary of this upper platform. All right, this floor is almost entirely complete. At this point, it's just a matter of finishing up this upper part of the wall here and then installing the columns. Now, I would be lying if I didn't confess that there's a small part of me that regrets that we're gonna install these columns, because it's gonna obscure a bunch of the detail here, the architectural specificity, if you will. But, in moments like these, I remind myself that it's important to trust in the vision for the bigger picture, which is to have a big circular array of all these buttresses. I know that's gonna work out. I know that's gonna be cool. So at this point, I am going to move forward with it. Plus, some of these details we can repeat elsewhere in the city. So it's by no means detail that gets lost. We can repeat that elsewhere.
Here we are with the end result, and I'm very happy with where we ended up. I'll take this down into the photo studio and shoot some footage with a little bit more atmospheric lighting and take some photos and everything. But before we do any of that, we have to essentially repeat everything we've done in this episode and in the previous episode to build the mirrored version of what you see here. Now, we could spend a bunch more time lapses on that and all that kind of stuff, but I don't want to do any of that. We're going to invoke the magic of editing and skip to the point in time in the future where I will have already built the mirrored copy. Here we go. Oh my gosh, this thing is really heavy. I am going to go into the studio now and show this off in a more tranquil setting. Let's go.
OMW, on my way to you. OMW, on my way to you. Good at what I do. OMW, on my way to you. Good at what I do. I'm OMW, OMW, on my way to you. Good at what I do. I'm OMW.
So I barely fit at the table anymore. This thing is enormous. Even the back is kind of strangely impressive. It kind of looks like a toddler trying to build a football stadium. This build, more than any of my other builds, certainly sets the tone for how epic the whole city needs to become. Now, there's some aspects of this build that I want to touch on briefly. One of those is that there are a lot of work in progress elements to it. One of those, for example, is this rock face that's purely placeholder. Eventually, this is going to have to be integrated into the larger city around the harbor. All of the scaffolding you can still see clearly right now is going to have to be hidden behind other pieces of rock work and other architecture. I touched on this briefly earlier in the video when I spoke about the storefronts not being very clearly visible in this build, and they aren't, but that's totally fine. I intend to have a commercial district elsewhere in the city, and that's really where I want to play up the theme of shops and make much more detailed variants of the different kind of shops that I was talking about before. Now, when it comes to the minifigures, we need a much more structured approach. Right now, we have a variety of minifigures from existing Lego sets, but ultimately, each of the factions in the city needs a clear identity. Think shopkeepers, soldiers, royal guards, black market traders. All of these need distinct outfits, and we need to put those together. Now, another detail to point out is the implementation of some amount of atmospheric perspective in the color scheme of the upper story. As you can see, the outer row of flying buttresses has this splash of dark orange, whereas the row of columns behind it has bricks that are medium nougat instead. And by using two different colors, we intentionally create some amount of depth between those two layers, if you will. Because you're seeing this on a screen, having that extra depth is quite critical in establishing that this is very much like a 3D structure and not just a flat surface that you're looking at. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's take this back to the Lego room and talk about our next step. All right, we've got the circular harbor on the table, finally. Now, it's not exactly in the right place. We need to move it over a little bit, but as you can see, the wooden scaffolding that's currently holding up the castle is in the way. We have to cut a chunk off of that, and then we also have to build a new wooden platform around the circular harbor, and we are now finally able to do that. And so that's one of the things that we'll be doing in the next episode. Now, looking past that, there's effectively two different routes we can take. The first of which is to connect the circular harbor to the castle section, and that will involve us building some amount of landscaping, focusing on the wall that sits between the palace and the castle, building the waterfall out here in the back, or we can leave this entire section for what it is for the time being and focus exclusively on expanding the circular harbor upwards and starting to work on the base layer of the palace. Now, I'm really curious to hear from you all what you think, so by all means, please let me know in the comments and I will for sure take your feedback into consideration. All right, and this is where we wrap up the episode. Once again, thank you so much for watching. If you're not already subscribed, please make sure to do so. This is gonna be an amazing project. I will see you all in the next episode, Project 99 Base Plates.